shot through the heart, and you're to blame. You give love a bad name. I play my part, and you play your game. You give love a bad name. Yeah, you give love a bad name.
Ah, music. It's the one language that everyone in the world can understand. Just ask the millions of people who don't speak Korean but love listening to K-pop. No matter who you are or where you live, if you are able to hear sound, there's going to be some form of music that will speak to you, whether it's rock, pop, hip-hop, country, classical, jazz, or even video game soundtracks. So, of course, many people are going to turn to music for inspiration when naming someone or something, like 1990s pop star and Yuletide icon Mariah Carey, who is named after the song They Call the Wind Mariah, or Dolly the Cloned Sheep, who was named after legendary country singer Dolly Parton, or the Opera Internet Browser, named after a type of European musical theater, or all the characters in Mega Man who are named after musical terms and genres. Now, as someone who has taken singing lessons and sung in a church choir for years, dabbled in playing a few musical instruments, listened to music from several different genres, and watched a ton of two-set violin back when they were still active, I consider myself pretty knowledgeable when it comes to music. So I thought it would be fun to take a look at where all the musical names for Mega Man characters came from, and what their name origins can tell us about them as characters. I mean, names don't come from nowhere, and when it comes to fictional characters, the names that are chosen for them usually have a lot of meaning. So, turn up those speakers and make sure your instrument's in tune, cause today, we're talking about the musical names of the Mega Man series. First of all, let's look at the characters from the NES era of Mega Man, or Mega Man 1 through 6, and analyze their musical names. Right off the bat, we have Mega Man, whose original name before becoming a super fighting robot was Rock, and his younger sister, Roll. This is in reference to rock and roll, which is a term for rock music often used in the mid-20th century. Nowadays, music experts use the term rock and roll to refer to the rock music of the 50s.
But he could play a guitar just like a ring in a bell. Go, go! Go, Johnny, go, go! Go, Johnny, go, go!
Since Mega Man was inspired by Astro Boy, a manga character from the 50s, and Roll has her hair in a ponytail, which was popularized in the 50s as a cute hairstyle for girls, these names make sense. In addition, being named after rock music does make sense when you consider the decade when the first Mega Man game came out, the 1980s, when rock music was bigger than ever. What had once been considered music for teens and only teens in the 50s was now considered music for everybody. Rock stars were making millions, selling out crowded stadiums, and getting all the ladies. And by this point, rock had begun to splinter into subgenres, so there was no one way for rock music to sound. In fact, my outfit today is based on 80s rock musicians and their fans. Now, in the original Japanese, this theme naming is more pronounced, as Mega Man is known as Rockman over there. So, why'd they change it here in the States? Well, I think it has to do with the multiple meanings of the English word rock. In its native English, the word rock can mean stone, to move back and forth, or a genre of music. But in Japanese, their word for rock as in stone is iwa, and their word for rock as in move back and forth is yuru. So, roku solely refers to that genre of music. So when people hear Rockman in English-speaking countries, they won't automatically understand it as Rockman, like the Japanese do, and they'll get confused because he doesn't throw rocks or shake his enemies back and forth. At least, that's my theory. Speaking of Japanese names that were changed because of homonyms that don't exist in Japanese but exist in English, Proto Man's original Japanese name was Blues. The name blues, of course, comes from the blues, an American music genre that was invented all the way back in the 1890s by African Americans in the South. Blues music exploded in popularity in the 20s with musicians like Ma Rainey and remained popular well into the 50s. but more importantly, the blues is to American music what that ancient fish that was able to walk on land is to the animal kingdom. So much of what we have today evolved from it. Jazz evolved from blues in the 20s and spawned its own genre. R&B evolved from blues in the 40s, once again spawning its own genre, and R&B further evolved into soul and funk, which would evolve into hip-hop in the 70s, which also spawned its own genre. And, most importantly for our purposes, rock and roll evolved from the blues in the 50s and would go on to spawn its own vast genre. So you see, the blues was the predecessor to rock and roll. And Proto Man was Dr. Light's first creation and the first robot to have independent thought. So just like the musical genres, blues is the predecessor to rock and roll. Blues music is also known for being sad, and Proto Man is a very troubled character with a sad backstory. But, as I mentioned, his name was changed to Proto Man in English-speaking countries. This is because the music genre of blues derives its name from the association of the color blue with sadness, as blues songs were usually sad. However, in Japan, the color blue is called ao, and burusu just means a genre of music. So, while we associate the blues with the color blue, Japanese people who probably don't speak English would not. Hence why they made him red and not blue. However, American audiences would be confused as to why the red one is called Blues, so his name was changed to Proto Man because he's a prototype. Now, contrary to popular belief, Rush is not named after the Canadian prog rock band of the same name. He was actually named after the Capcom game Rush and Crash, and possibly also after Lassie, whose name is transliterated as Rashi in Japanese. However, Beat, Mega Man's other little animal buddy, does have a musical name, and better yet, it's a pun that works on 4 levels. See, in music, a beat is a rhythmic unit, and the beat is usually used to refer to the rhythm of a song. But you all probably know on some level what the beat of a song is. However, the word beat, as a verb, also refers to the up and down motion of a bird's wings, as beat is, indeed, a bird. And as Dookie Shed pointed out in his video, Beat Will F You Up, beat as a verb also means to strike someone repeatedly with the intent to harm them, which is exactly what beat does to enemies when summoned in the NES games. Beat can also mean defeat, as in beating a boss, and as it turns out, all of the Darkman robots in the Wily capsule in Mega Man 5 are weak to beat, so Beat beats his wings, beats up bad guys, and beats Dr. Wily. While musical names are popular for the robots, the humans in the Mega Man series don't tend to have them. Dr. Light's name just comes from the English words light and right, in reference to his hopeful and righteous nature. Dr. Wily's name just comes from the word wily, in reference to his crafty and devious nature. And Dr. Cossack's name just comes from the Cossacks, a people group living in southern Russia and Ukraine who were skilled at riding horses and were recruited by the Tsar to conquer land for the Russian Empire back in the olden days, in reference to the fact that he's Russian. However, Dr. Cossack's daughter does fit with the musical theme naming. Her name is Kalinka, which is derived from a Russian folk song called Kalinka. Does it sound familiar? Well, it should, as it's commonly used to represent Russia in movies and stuff. The name of the song is, in turn, derived from the fruit of the snowball tree, which in Russian is called kalina. Kalina fruits are a common symbol in Russian folklore, and are associated with feminine beauty due to their eye-catching red color. So, a fitting name for a girly girl who wears primarily red. Now let's take a look at characters who made their debut in Mega Man 7 or later. Bass and treble are named after bass clef and treble clef, the two clefs used in double staff sheet music. If you've ever played piano or been in a mixed-gender choir, you're probably at least somewhat familiar with double staff sheet music, and thus with bass clef and treble clef. Because bass and treble were made to complement each other, it makes sense that their names would be derived from the two clefs used in piano and choral music. Bass also sounds like bass, which is an old-fashioned term for immoral, and treble sounds like trouble, because, you know, they're bad guys. However, bass and treble are not their original names. In Japan, they're called forte and gospel. While I couldn't find a primary source that confirms this, someone on TV Tropes noted that these names were likely chosen as a reference to F clef and G clef, which is what bass clef and treble clef are called in Japanese. Forte starts with an F, and gospel starts with a G. In addition, forte is a dynamic used in sheet music that indicates that you must play loudly, and is derived from the Italian word for strong. This fits bass, as he's said to be the strongest robot that Dr. Wily has created so far, and he knows it. He's also got kind of an obnoxious personality, and most of his lines end with exclamation points. So he's certainly strong, and he's certainly loud. Gospel, though, is a genre of Christian choral music, popular in the Pentecostal Church and many other Protestant denominations in the USA. However, I don't really think it's a fitting name for treble. Gospel music is supposed to be hopeful and all about praising Jesus, but treble is grumpy and probably doesn't even know who Jesus is. I mean, I've heard that all dogs go to heaven, but I don't think it's because all dogs are super religious. So I think they might have just chosen gospel because there are only so many musical terms that start with the letter G. Furthermore, their names were originally going to be Baroque and Crash, as puns on rock and Rush, their counterparts. Baroque is the era of classical music that Bach and Vivaldi fall under, and a crash is a type of cymbal. Duo's name is another word for a duet, or a musical composition for two instruments. A duo is also a general term for two people who perform together, and is thus often used to refer to a band with only two people. Famous musical duos include Simon and Garfunkel, Eurythmics, and the White Stripes. The character of Duo has a lot to do with duality, as he has an evil counterpart that is a similar size and shape to him, so his name fits. In the comics exclusively, the theme naming is continued, as Duo's evil counterpart is named Trio, a term for a band with 3 members or a piece for 3 instruments, and there's another member of their group called Quartet, a term for a band with 4 members or a piece for 4 instruments. Similarly to Rush, some people have claimed that King was named after Elvis Presley, who was known as the King of Rock and Roll, or simply the King. Though fun fact, Elvis didn't think this title fit him, and he said that Fats Domino, one of the first ever rock and roll musicians and a huge influence on Elvis's music, was the real king of rock and roll. But like, King could also just be named after the English word king. You know, as in an unelected male ruler of a country. And King's goal is to form a robot-only nation where he's in charge. His quote from the field guide is even, "Long live the robot kingdom!" Note that he said kingdom and not republic. Now let's move on to the characters who made their debut in side games and see if any of them have meaningful names. Anchor's name comes from enka, a genre of Japanese vocal music. The best way I can describe enka is Celine Dion in a kimono. Enka music is typically slow in tempo and has sentimental or sorrowful lyrics, similar to Western pop ballads. However, enka also has some stylistic influences from traditional Japanese music, including the use of a pentatonic scale. Further reflecting this, many enka singers wear traditional Japanese clothes when performing. Since Anchor himself was designed to look Japanese, it makes sense that he'd be named after a Japanese genre of music. In addition, further tying into the genre he's named after, the Robot Master Field Guide describes him as gloomy, which reflects how enka music is usually about sad subjects like breakups, loneliness, or hard times. Quint is named after a quintet, a piece of music written for 5 instruments. The term quintet can also be used to refer to a band with 5 members. However, unlike with Duo, whose name at least reflects a theme of duality present in his struggle with the evil robot, I can't for the life of me think about what a 5-person band has to do with a future version of Mega Man reprogrammed for battle. I guess he does have V shapes on his head, body, and pogo stick, and V is the Roman numeral for 5, but I doubt that was intentional. Punk is named after punk rock, a subgenre of rock music known for anti-establishment lyrics, fast tempo, stripped-down instrumentation, and a do-it-yourself spirit. Punk rock was especially popular in the 1970s, with many rebellious young people gravitating towards punk bands like the Ramones and the Clash. Punk rock, though, is the distinctive outfits that punk rockers and their fans would often wear. Usually these included things like leather jackets, ripped jeans, spiked wristbands, combat boots, safety pins as earrings, and spiky hairstyles that went straight up, especially mohawks. Appearance-wise, Punk certainly looks like a punk rocker, with the mohawk-like crest on his head and all the spikes on his body, including on his wrists. In fact, the Robot Master Field Guide says that Punk likes accessories, which may be in reference to how punk fashion often incorporates a variety of chains, pins, wristbands, chokers, piercings, and other types of jewelry. The Robot Master Field Guide also says that punk is very independent, which lines up with the anti-authoritarian and DIY nature of punk music and punk culture. Unlike the other two Mega Man killers, whose names come from music genres that became popular in the 20th century, Belade's name comes from classical music, particularly from the 19th century. A ballade is a one-movement instrumental piece that uses music to convey a narrative. Ballades are most commonly piano pieces, but ballades for other instruments exist as well. Instead of adhering to the sonata and rondo structures common in classical music, ballades are more flexible, focusing more on telling a story. The first composer to use the term ballade in the context of instrumental music was Frédéric Chopin, whose 4 ballades are among his most popular and difficult works. Many other composers would go on to write piano ballades, including Brahms, Debussy, Grieg, and Liszt. So why did they choose this specific type of piano piece to name Ballade after? Well, keep in mind that Ballade is one of the few characters in the Mega Man franchise to go through a character arc over the course of his debut game. When you first meet him, he wants to destroy Mega Man. However, after being defeated twice, he sees the error of his ways and has a change of heart, to the point where he sacrifices his own life to help Mega Man escape from the Wily battleship. And a ballade is a type of musical piece that evokes a story arc, so it makes sense that he'd take his name from it. Tango, much like Quint, doesn't really have a deep meaning to his name. He's named after tango music, a style of music from Argentina and Uruguay that's in 2/4 or 4/4 time, usually incorporates a type of accordion called a bandoneon, and often accompanies the famous tango dance. However, I couldn't find much to link him to his musical namesake. What does a robotic house cat have to do with South America, or ballroom dancing, or accordions? I guess you could make the argument that cats are very graceful creatures, and tango dancers are supposed to be graceful as well. Speaking of animals introduced in the spin-offs and named after musical genres, let's talk about reggae. Now, reggae was introduced in a Japan-only game called Wily and Light's Rock Board, That's Paradise, which was a virtual board game starring Mega Man characters that released for the Famicom in 1993. It was like Mario Party before Mario Party. Reggae would later appear again as a shopkeeper in Mega Man 10, if you're playing as Bass. As you can see, Reggae is a bird robot, and according to the lore, he was built by Dr. Wily to be a support robot, but mostly just laughs at Wily when he messes up, like an avian Nelson Muntz. Reggae is named after a genre of music invented in, and heavily associated with, the country of Jamaica. The reason why they gave this name to a talkative bird may be in reference to a very famous reggae song, 3 Little Birds by Bob Marley and the Wailers. In case you don't remember, the song is about 3 birds talking to someone and giving them an uplifting message. Now, I don't think reggae is the type of bird who's gonna tell you that every little thing's gonna be alright, but that's the strongest possible link I could come up with between the character and the genre of music, so sue me. Finally, let's discuss some characters with music names that appeared outside of the Mega Man Classic video games. First of all, if any of you have read the Mega Man Archie comics, you might remember a character named Quake Woman, whose original name was Tempo. Tempo is another musical term, used to refer to the speed of a piece of music. This is quite fitting for her, as she's a somber and serious character when she's introduced in issue 13, then becomes cheerful and energetic when her personality programming is restored. Kind of like how the mood of a song can completely change if you slow down or speed up the tempo. Another Mega Man comic series, Mega Man Megamix, was originally going to introduce a character named Piano, who was a feminine counterpart to Bass, or Forte as he's known in Japan. However, Piano was ultimately scrapped. Just as Forte's name is derived from the loud dynamic in sheet music, Piano's name is derived from the quiet dynamic in sheet music. In fact, the English word piano is just a short version of the instrument's Italian name, pianoforte, because it can play both softly and loudly. However, that does beg the question, if Piano had not been scrapped, would her name be translated for the English release, and if so, to what? Personally, if I was in this hypothetical situation, I would have given her the name Alto, in reference to alto clef, the uncommonly used midway clef between treble clef and bass clef. Also, it would further establish her status as a distaff counterpart to bass, as a man with a very low singing voice is classified as a bass, while a woman with a very low singing voice is classified as an alto. Finally, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about that time that a woman accidentally added to Mega Man's tradition of musical theme naming because she wanted to make her husband happy. I may not know very much about Mega Man X, but considering I'm dressed like a 1980s heavy metal groupie, you bet I'm going to talk about the Mega Man X5 Guns N' Roses thing. If you don't know who Guns N' Roses are, they're a part of the great pantheon of 1980s metal bands. Up there with like Van Halen and Aerosmith and Bon Jovi and Motley Crue and Def Leppard and probably some other bands that I'd be called a poser for not mentioning. You may have heard some of their songs like Welcome to the Jungle and Sweet Child of Mine.
Welcome to the jungle. We got fun and games. We got everything you want. How do we know the names? We are the people that can find whatever.
Now, like any band of their status, Guns N' Roses has many fans all over the world. And one of those fans was a man named Eric Suzuki, who worked as a translator for Capcom USA. However, when he was translating Mega Man X5 into English, he asked his then-wife, Canadian actress Alison Court, to help him. Ms. Court did not know much about Mega Man X, but she did know her husband liked Guns N' Roses, so she changed the names of all 8 of the game's Mavericks to reference members of Guns N' Roses. Crescent Grizzly became Grizzly Slash, in reference to Slash, the band's lead guitarist. Tidal Whale became Duff McWhalen, in reference to Duff McKagan, the band's bassist. Volt Kraken became Squid Adler, in reference to Steven Adler, who was the band's drummer during the 80s. Shining Firefly became Izzy Glow, in reference to Izzy Stradlin, who was the band's rhythm guitarist in the 80s. Dark Necrobat became Dark Dizzy, in reference to Dizzy Reed, the band's keyboardist. Spiral Pegasus became the Skyver, in reference to Michael High in the Sky Monroe, a frequent collaborator with Guns N' Roses. Burn Dino Rex became Matrex, after Matt Sorum, who was the band's drummer during much of the 90s. And finally, Spike Rose Red became Axl the Red, after the band's lead singer Axl Rose. It works especially well for Axl the Red, or Spike Rose Red, or whatever you want to call him, because he's literally a rose. Eric Suzuki, of course, was charmed by the names of these characters, but when the games hit store shelves in the English-speaking world, people had mixed reactions. A lot of people complained that the names weren't accurate to the original Japanese names and didn't fit with the theme naming of the Mavericks, which, from what I can gather, is characteristic, living thing. In addition, many people thought that some of the names, like Duff McWhalen and Matrex, sounded awkward and ugly. But others thought that a reference to a famous rock band was perfect for a series literally named after rock music, and noted that their designs and personalities were not altered from the Japanese version, only their names were. Regardless, despite the silly names, these Mavericks still became popular and beloved by the fans. I guess Alison Court proved that a Spike Rose Red by any other name would smell as sweet. Eventually, when the Mega Man X Legacy Collection was released, their names would be changed to names that were closer to the Japanese original. But even if the current names are more accurate and descriptive, I still think the Guns N' Roses names are really cool, if only because of the neat trivia surrounding them. So, those are all the characters in the Mega Man series with music-themed names. Again, I love music, and I found it really fun to educate you guys about music. Or, I don't know, just tell you stuff that you knew already. And because the world of music is so vast, there are so many genres and terms that could be used for future musical names. We could have a character named aria, or disco, or legato, or metal. Wait. Anyways, if you liked the video, or are once again just impressed by my huge hair, be sure to like and subscribe. And make sure to support my Patreon if you can. Until next time, stay stylish.
「そしていつも同じ場所で死ぬ」「諦めずに消える練習場に挑戦するけどすぐにシェイターに落ちるよ」「アイテムにゴムがあれば楽に向こうの岸まで探るけど」「何回やっても何回やってもエアメンへ倒せないよあの竜巻何回やっても避けられない後ろに続けてもいずれは風に飛ばされるタイムレーンだの試してみたけど竜巻相手で意味がないだから次は絶対勝つために僕はいい感だけは最後まで取っておく少ししかないそしていつもそこで時間使う諦めずにエアマンまでたどり着くけれどすぐに短期なくなるリーフシールドがあれば楽にエアマンを倒せるけど何回やっても何回やってもダメに倒せないよ落ちるこの葉は何回やっても後ろに下がって距離を取ってもいずれは距離を詰められるタイムランだも試してみたけどあいつのジャンプは見えないだから次は絶対勝つために僕はいい感だけは最後まで取っておくこの岸まで続くけど何回やっても何回やってもエアメンへ倒せないよ